Thank you so much. Yeah, my name is Rakesh, Enterprise Data Architect at Single Store. Very warm welcome to our session for today's session, which is the real applications of generative AI. So we all know it's not a secret that world is in an induced frenzy, right? However, businesses to really leverage or embrace that AI technology, they need to go beyond the hype and understand and how it can deliver the tangible results, maybe desirable results, how to empower your business. So I was listening to one of the sessions here from Mr. Manoj from EXL. So he really gave a very good perspective about how the Gen AI has been implemented in their platform, right? So what I'm going to do, I'll take you to another angle today, which is Gen AI plus data. How, whatever we speak it's a data, we write, it's a data, everything is data, and it has to get collected somehow. And how Gen AI can, along with enterprise data, can act and empower your business and increase the revenue to your company is what we are going to talk about. So with that, let me give you a quick overview of single store first. So what's single store? If you know about, some of you might already know about single store, some of you might not have heard about single store, right? Single store is a general purpose SQL relational distributed modern data system built for speed, scale, and agility. And this platform is built for data intensive applications, right? So a database that can transact, analyze, and also contextualize in the real time. So how do we do transact? With the in-memory row-oriented data structure, which is a distributed SQL, horizontally scalable. How we do analytics? We have an amazing patented technology called universal storage, which is completely columnar oriented, aggregate functions, super fast ingest, low latency, which again makes your applications real time. Now, along with this, I'm going to talk a bit about contextualization, how single store is put into contextualization, right? So this is single data platforms. You don't need to have a transactional or analytic or contextualization is what the story is. So how we do contextualizations? Using vectors, semantic search, keyword search, notebooks. Notebooks, again, it's a integrated platform with our product where you can generate or where you can develop your own custom code, maybe API or a Gen API kind of a chatbots, and directly integrate and bring the data from the database. So this again tells what a single store is all about. A summary is single store is a HTAB database. So it can handle both OLAP and OLTP together in a single platform. How we do that? Using our patented technology called universal storage, right? So it's very great for analytical queries, fast aggregations, dynamic data sets with a very large concurrency. All enterprises does suffer that, and we solve that problem day in, day out. So some of the examples I would like to give here, right? So Uber is leveraging single store for massive, highly concurrent querying. And if you see the search price or geospatial or a driver location, all this is done behind the screens with single store. And if you get a search charge in your Uber, don't blame us. Again, Tier 1 US bank is using us for fraud detection analytics. So they were using an incumbent technology, and which was taking more than 5 seconds to tell whether the swiped card transaction is fraudulent or a genuine. With single store, we run almost 50 analytical queries as soon as you swipe a card and tell whether this transaction is genuine or fraud. And that is happening in just 50 millisecond time of framework. And with that, they almost saved 40 million annual operational cost savings with that. And some example, Hulu, top energy company with IoT use cases, all the sensor data is coming into the system and doing a huge analytics and saving a massive TCO as well. Akamai is using us for a billing purpose. So we are able to do 10 million upserts per second for Akamai. And look at the scale and the huge transactions, right? So it was taking more than few minutes, and single store was able to do that, 10 million upserts in a second. So again, this is a single database for all your data complexity, right? So these are some of our customers, and how there's 2 points here. So one is consolidation of your data and simplification of your data. So if you take an example of Fathom, so they ended up having a multi-vendor approach for data streaming, for caching, and for doing analytics on top of that. With single store, they are able to get that ultra fast ingest with massive high concurrency and low latency. And that's what single store is all about. And there's few other examples where you can see how the consolidation and simplification is happening within a data world. Again, single store is, you can see there are a lot of logos behind that. These are some of our Fortune 500 companies, right? So who are using single store for their real-time distributed SQL data-intensive applications. What do you mean by data-intensive application, right? So if your application has a huge amount of data, and that data can be structured, semi-structured, unstructured, text, and all kinds of data in the world. And if you have a requirement of problem of streaming of ingest into system, and if you have a requirement or a problem of all the applications will need a low latency kind of a platform, right? Or some applications will have a very huge complexity, and single store is built to solve that for all the data intensive applications. And single store is also in the different footprints in the industry. So starting from finance, cybersecurity, supply chain, real-time analytics, gaming, and all walks of life. And we are able to do analytics in millisecond time of framework. So what is under the hood? So you might be amazed. You're saying you can do OLTP, you can do OLAP, you can do vectorization, you can do semantic search, and what is under the hood, how the engine works here, right? So there are three important points here, and this is just a simplified version of the engine of our Ferrari, right? So if you see the left side, the data pipeline, so that is where it becomes real time. Single store get connected to various different heterogeneous data sources. It can bring the data from your object store, it can bring the data from your applications, and we use a MPP technology there. It's not a single threaded, we use multiple cores to process that in a very, very fast way. And in the center, if you see, that is where the entire architecture or the storage has been built up. So how we are fast? We are directly writing the data into memory. That makes streaming very, very faster. And once the data comes into a memory, it automatically flushed down to a second layer, which I was talking about, transactional, analytic, and contextualization. The first layer here, I'm again talking about transactional, and which is always row-oriented based system. And the second layer, automatically the data gets flushed down to a columnar segments with massively optimized engine. So, and now further, all the historical data or cold data will be further flushed down to a cold object storage, right? So all the data movement, there's no manual intervention here. All the data movement will happen automatically. No manual intervention requires based on your query shape, patterns, and this takes care behind the scenes with the engine. And on the right, if you see, so talking about the scale out architecture, right? So single store is built for scale out architecture. So if you have a huge data coming in, we have a scale out mechanism which can scale, and hundreds and thousands of users can get connected to our aggregators, and then all the data operations will happen in all the leaf nodes where you're seeing. So what are the key product capabilities? So we talked about universal storage built for speed, fast ingestion, and we also do a compute of separation of compute and storage. So where you can, separate out your storage and separate out your compute, and you can leverage massive TCO there. So the recent feature which we released in few weeks back is MongoDB API compatible. We call it a single store Kai. What we do is we augment single store, no change in your MongoDB application, no data movement, no changes to your ETL. The same query which you are running in the MongoDB application can be run in single store with 100 to 1000x performance. And we are multi-model. So multi-model meaning we are relational, JSON capability, time series, geospatial. I gave some of the use cases example as well. We have been very instrumental and leader in terms of vectorization as well. So single store also has a vector data capability, and we'll talk more about that in terms of connecting to GenAI. So runs anywhere and compatibility, ANSI SQL, MySQL or MariaDB compatible with the platform. So now let's talk about contextualization. What is contextualization? How it can be integrated with the data, right? So everybody are talking about Gen AI and all the applications, how it can massively give the response and all those things. But with Gen AI and database, the contextualization becomes easier. How we do that is through vectorization. So you might have, where the world is headed, right? So you might have, everybody have used ChatGPT, right? So there's an OpenAI model which is using GPT 3.5 or GPT 4.0, which is the latest large language modules. And we have a number of LLMs like Hugging Face, Cohere, or Anthropex, which are all OpenAI LLMs. So what's so hype about it, right? So what can it do? What can an LLM do, right? Or LLM plus Gen AI can do? It can write poems, it can write essays, it can summarize your large document and give the response. It can reason, it can translate for you, and it can also write code, which is terrifying for developers. But now we have lot of public data there. So all, Chat GPT, you might have known this, Chat GPT is trained to handle the internet data till 2021, right? All the data in the internet till 2021 has been given to LLM. It's trained to answer, to do a research, to analyze and reason and give the response as a mechanism in the process. But where is the world headed now? So there's two concepts here. One is the custom apps, and again, the other one is agentic. So custom apps is what we are going to talk about today. What is custom apps and why we need that? So that is what custom app is nothing but Gen AI apps, right? So how do we integrate? So what's the connection between your LLMs and the Gen AI and under the hood, the database? Agentic is the next step of custom apps, I would say. So custom apps can do, as I said, research and do a lot of things. But agentic apps can also do things for you, can also do stuff for you. So which is a next step forward in Gen AI world. So what do I need in order to build a custom app, right? So we need three things here important. One is LLM. It is very difficult to build LLM because the enterprises concentrate more on their applications rather than going and building the LLMs, right? So they choose the LLMs because it's a very costly affair. And the second thing what you need here is the database, right? So you get the data from the OpenAI or from all the LLMs, and you have to store somewhere to process it. So I was looking the last presentation, Tableau, Pulse, and how the data has been retrieved and given back the response. But it has to get stored somewhere in some format. What is that? And you need to have your custom code, which is that the GenAI app which you will build or your business will build leveraging these concepts. So let me talk about data aware, right? So I have an LLM, but my LLM should be custom to my data. So I have to get trained on my data, not public data, right? So I have like, very large enterprise of maybe 200K employees and doing a lot of surveys and things like that. So your LLM, you can't just use, plain LLMs. You have to train your LLM. You have to customize the LLM which you choose to work on your data. And that data should always be fresh to the LLMs. Now, all OpenAI models, as I said, it is, you can get the data till 2021. But your custom apps is a real-time business, which is empowering your business, where you need the data to be fresh and to be provided to your LLMs to get the response back. And my data should be, of course, private, right? So the data should always be private in your data center, in your VPC, securely networked, and all those things. So this is the data awareness of all the business is getting now, all the enterprises is doing now. So with this, I've just simplified pictorial representation of what I just talked about, right? So I have three components here: LLMs, Gen API, and the company data. So which is my business data, or which I have to work with my customer data, which is very public and be private, and it doesn't have to go to a public. So in this picture, you can see the end user is talking to Gen AI app, and then you do go and do a search, and you get a response back to the Gen AI. That is what is happening in all your chatbots or even the GPT and all the custom GPTs as well. And the response which we get from the Gen AI API will be sent to the LLMs, and then we get the response in few seconds. So the second part here, the search and retrieve, is important thing where the Gen AI and data which I am talking about now. So in the Gen AI terminology, we call it as RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation, for the semantic search with your data, right? So there are three ways to make the Gen AI data aware. As I said, you need to choose your LLM, you need to retain that LLM, and you need to fine tune that LLM, because that LLM has to be private and has to work on my custom data. And the third important part here is retrieval augmented generate. So your Gen API will have to talk to a database, and that database has to be enterprise grade database. And you get the response back, and the LLMs will take care of responding it. So let's talk about search, right? So I did mention about search here, search and retrieval. There are two types of search in the database world. So one is semantic search and the regular search, which is lexical search. Regular search is you give a word and then you get the response back of that particular sentence, right? However, semantic search is, for example, you take an example of dog. A dog is very similar to animal. Dog is very similar to X species. Dog is very similar to husky. Dog is not very similar, to a dolphin, but it is an animal, right? So you see, the neighbors of that particular word will be collated together, and that we call it a semantic search. And the way we store it in the database is very, very important. And how that data is stored. So if, for example, when you get a text from all this unstructured data, say for example, I got a word called dog. Now I have to store that. How it is stored in the database to do a Gen AI, to enhance or empower using a Gen AI application. So what it does is, it does a vectorization. That text will be converted into vectors. What is vectors? Just an embedding. It's a random floating point integer number, and you can put that into multi-dimensional space, like probably 100D kind of a thing. So we know 1D, 2D, 3D, probably 4D, but you think of multi-dimensional in 100D space, you are putting that in a vectorization or vector format in a database. So how do I do the semantic search now? So A database that can store the vectors, has to index the vectors because you store massive amount of vectors and you have to index the data to get the cluster of that response back to your Gen API, right? And the database can also do a search vectors, and with single store, you can do that because single store is also a vector database. And we are in the industry, we are doing this vectorization from 2017 now. And there are three important things about vectors, right? So how do you create the vectors? So you are getting the data from lot of places and you have to create the vectors. You leverage the OpenAI embeddings or some frameworks, Hugging Face, transformers, and that will convert that text, image, audio, video into vectorization format. And that has to be stored in your database. How we store it in single store? We store it as a blob data type in the database. And we index using various different technologies. And we do a search and retrieve using inbuilt functions within the platform using dot product, Euclidean distance, and other vectorization functions. So three things: create a vector, store a vector, search a vector. And this is just an example what we did recently. So what we did is we stored celebrity images in our database, thousands of images in our database. And we did it that using vectorization. We stored all the images in the vector format. And then we started comparing, images, my image, and how closely I match with the celebrity. And actually, we can show this when you come down to our booth, and we can click your photo, and we can match and show, who is your closest match with the celebrity. So what typical enterprises are doing now, this is where I was coming from, right? So if you see, typical enterprises now has a lot of complexity. So the data is coming in, the data has to go to OLTP systems first, and then do a ETL transformation, and then it has to go to OLAP, and then you will have a semi-structured, then you will have unstructured, you will have a different analytics for that, and then you will add another complexity, adding another vector database here, right? It's a huge, complex architecture which we are trying to solve in a single platform. So what does specialized vector databases in the market, right? So if you can see some of the names here, Milvus or Pinecone, these are special database vectors, but they do lack something. What is that? They do have a limited SQL support, built only for vectors. They don't have other enterprise grade capacities, no long indexing strategies. The main important thing is no enterprise features. If you go and search in a Google, Pinecone lost data, so you'll see number of articles which has affected the business because it's just not enterprise grade software. It can't handle the vector database. It's just a vector database, but it's not a vector capability. Scalability and performance, there are a lot of things which lacks from these specialized vector databases. And what I meant by here is vectors is just not equal to contextual. We started talking about contextualization, but vector is not just contextualization. Vectors plus your GenAI app makes the contextualization together. So what is contextual database now? So all the data relevant to your company. So this is what typical enterprises expects. And ability to join the vector with transactional analytical capability, ability to real-time ingest. It can run on anywhere with massive protected, secured environment. Hybrid searches, do semantic searches. All this comes into a category of contextual databases, but specialized vector database is currently lacking that. So what single store can do? Single store can do vector semantic search and keyword matching with our built-in feature, which is very faster and optimized. Can handle transactional analytical data in a SQL, pipelines, fast ingest, runs anywhere, and we also have a notebooks that combines with Python plus SQL. You can use your notebook. Actually, single store is the only database which is matured enough to do vectorization on JSON data. So with single store DB, how how does the architecture look? You saw about typical enterprise architecture. Now with single store DB, this is how your Gen AI application plus the database looks like, right? So your all the database sources from OLTP, OLAP, a single turn, single data platform stored in single store database, and then that is kept as a vectorization. You store it and give it back to OpenAI, and then within few milliseconds you'll get the response back. So some of our customers who are using single store DB vectors, right? So Lumix is using for surveillance use cases, and Thorn is using for facial recognition for preventing human trafficking. LiveRamp is using for name search. Siemens is using for product cataloging, and Nairis is using us for semantic search. These are some enterprise customers who are already leveraging vector capability within the product. So it's call to action. So we have few things to show in our booth. One is, in fact, we have built our own chatbot, which is Gen AI app, which is being trained to operate on our own data. So if you ask anything, any documentation, code, whatever you want in single store, Squirrel can answer that for you. And as I said, if you want to, if you are interested in, knowing which celebrity do you match, then come to our booth, and we can also show you the movie recommendation use case as well. So if you type some movies and based on the data stored, you'll get a lot of recommendations out there. With that, I would stop here and take some questions if there is any.